How many times do you think one can escape from prison? Once? Maybe twice? But there are geniuses who can pull off this trick endlessly. Let me tell you about Stephen Russell, and it's going to be a crazy story of deceit and audacity, with an unexpected ending. Beginning. And it all began in the early 90s, when Stephen Russell first decided to execute his scheme. At that time, the guy had no criminal record and worked as an ordinary accountant in a company, leading a peaceful life without any extra trouble. However, Stephen's life took a sharp turn when his manager simply fired him out of the blue. This universal injustice angered and disappointed the guy, especially considering that he devoted himself entirely to his work and spent most of his time on it. And you know what he did next? Stephen completely reconsidered his attitude towards life. He transformed from a law-abiding and peaceful person into someone who would seek revenge and turn heads. The feeling of injustice and anger toward the system ignited a fire in him, pushing him onto a path that would forever change his destiny. Stephen was known for his ability to communicate with people, so he decided to use his intelligence and skills to become a con artist. His journey began with small, fraudulent operations targeting insurance companies. He staged accidents to claim insurance payouts. However, in 1992, one of his fraudulent schemes was uncovered. He was tracked down, and state authorities arrested him. Stephen was sentenced to 6 months in prison, and here's where it gets interesting. First term. Stephen had no intention of serving the full term in prison. He immediately began to devise an escape plan, intending to execute it just a month after arriving in prison. During this month, Stephen carefully observed the guards and staff, studying their routines and movements inside the prison. He discovered a simple way to deceive the guards and break free. Stephen noticed that sometimes civilian workers entered the prison. When they left, they simply approached the guard room, knocked on the glass, and the guards opened the door, allowing them to easily exit. These workers stood out because they wore civilian clothes instead of prison uniforms and carried portable radios. He arranged with a friend on the outside to secretly pass him clothes and a radio. The guy simply changed clothes, put on a serious face, and approached the guard room, signaling to them through the glass to let him out. And it happened just like that. The guards opened the door, and Stephen became a free man again. Brilliant, isn't it? After this audacious escape, he changed his identity and found refuge in Florida, where he remained on the run for 2 years, from 1992 to 1994. He engaged in old activities like forging insurance checks until he was caught again. Investigators were greatly surprised when the apprehended fraudster turned out to be a fugitive. This time, he decided not to run, but to serve his entire sentence. But wait, this is still just the beginning. Preparation for the scam. After his release, he got a job as a regular salesman in a small store, but such a life quickly bored him. He wanted a bit of luxury and wealth, but how? Right, he was a remarkable swindler. Now his goal was a large-scale scam that could provide him with financial freedom for many years. Soon, the perfect opportunity presented itself, a vacancy for a financial manager position in one of America's most prestigious insurance companies. The problem was that he had no relevant qualifications or experience in this field, not to mention his criminal record. But that didn't stop him. The first step was to forge his biography. He embellished it with impressive degrees, qualifications, and even work experience in various insurance companies worldwide. He bought several financial newspapers, such as the Wall Street Journal, and a few books on financial management. Stephen had a sharp mind, and soon he mastered the language and terminology of the financial sphere. When he went for the interview, everything went smoothly. His impressive qualifications and eloquence easily convinced the employers that he was perfect for the job. At the end of the interview, they eagerly asked for the names and numbers of the companies where he had previously worked to inquire about his work and professional achievements. Stephen Lingley provided them with 3 contact numbers, all of which were linked to a call forwarding service. When someone called these numbers, the call was redirected to Stephen, who answered each of them himself. Stephen skillfully handled all calls, assuming different roles to match the fictional personalities of his references.
What?
His voice easily changed, taking on different tones, accents, and even personalities. In each conversation, he created the illusion of an impeccable reputation, generously sprinkling praise and recommendations. Failure. Stephen successfully infiltrated the company, laying the groundwork for his grand plan. But unfortunately for him, one foolish mistake gave him away. He decided to refinance his house to get a lower interest rate. A bank employee noticed large sums of money passing through his account and wondered where this person got such large amounts. Tracing where the money came from, they traced it back to the insurance company where Stephen worked. When the news reached the CEO of the company and senior executives, they began an audit of financial records and discovered suspicious transactions organized by Stephen. As the investigation progressed, the truth quickly emerged. It became clear that he was a former criminal, still on parole, who was now tampering with his client's documents. Now, do you understand how easily you can fall victim to insurance scammers? But what do you do afterward if you're actually involved in a car accident? Where do you turn for help? How do you find a competent lawyer? How do you get compensation if you don't have insurance? DTP America has helped its clients obtain $21 million in compensation. Here, they'll definitely answer all your questions. Link in the description. Rumors about Stephen spread like wildfire, reaching the district prosecutor's office in a matter of minutes. But before chaos ensued, Stephen sensed the impending danger. Without hesitation, he attempted to flee. He managed to withdraw around $40,000 from several ATMs before his accounts were frozen. However, driven by desperation, Stephen dared to take a risky step. He decided to return home to retrieve his valuables, unaware that the police were already waiting for him there. He was arrested and sent back to prison for preparing fraud and forging documents. This time, the bail for release was extremely high, $950,000. It seemed impossible to gather such a sum, especially after all his accounts were frozen, but not for Stephen. Second escape. He wasn't willing to accept his fate. He didn't intend to stay in prison and called the records office of Harris County, the same county where he was incarcerated. The woman who answered the call was an employee of the office. Without hesitation or the slightest doubt, he boldly claimed to be Judge Charles Ham, the very judge who presided over his case. As a skilled manipulator, he informed her that under his jurisdiction was a prisoner named Stephen Russell, and that they had held a secret appellate hearing, resulting in a remarkable change. The bail, previously set at a staggering amount of $950,000, was drastically reduced to just $45,000, and the employee fell for it. Now Stephen was tasked with quickly finding the remaining $45,000. He came up with the idea of contacting a company that financed prisoners. Although their terms usually didn't suit such cases, Stephen somehow managed to persuade them to pay his bail, and the guy was free again. But the authorities of Harris County in Texas soon learned of Stephen's trickery. It took only 5 days to expose his plan. Unfortunately for Stephen, the police and investigators were constantly monitoring him, intercepting his calls. Thanks to these intercepted conversations, they were able to determine his location. It turned out he had gone to Florida and stayed at one of the beachfront hotels in West Palm Beach. There he was arrested again, caught off guard. After subsequent court proceedings, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison for theft and escape. In fact, he could have received a lighter sentence, but Stephen immediately pleaded guilty and accepted the punishment without appeal. Even the prosecutor was surprised by his quick submission, as the sentence was quite harsh. Of course, Stephen didn't plan to serve the full term. Even before the trial began, he knew he would attempt to escape again, regardless of the circumstances. New plan. Stephen sat, pondering, observing, and devising a new plan. The idea began to take shape when he noticed the presence of a medical wing in the prison. All the doctors and nurses in this wing wore green and blue medical suits. First, Stephen put on freshly painted green clothes, and then put on a white prison uniform over them. Then he had breakfast early at 4 a.m. After breakfast, he found a secluded place in the prison, shed the white prison clothes. Like the previous time, he confidently headed for the security zone. Stephen observed this zone for a long time and noticed that every day a female guard spent the entire morning talking on the phone, ignoring her surroundings. With confidence, he approached the guard, greeted her through the glass, and quickly convinced her to press the button and open the prison door. So Stephen became a free man again, though the joy was short-lived. He accidentally ran into a police marshal who had just received a fresh alert. Incurable disease. This time, 5 more years were added to his sentence, bringing it to 45 years without the possibility of parole. Of course, Stephen knew he couldn't sit quietly until he found a new way to escape. This time, strict supervision was imposed on him, making escape almost impossible. After all, Escaping 3 times is a real slap in the face to the system. However, Stephen came up with a crazy plan that required not only trust, but also immense effort. He found a loophole in the parole system for prisoners with chronic and serious illnesses. Stephen decided to trick the system into believing he had AIDS. The first step was fasting for several months. Then he simulated symptoms, inducing vomiting. To forge medical records, he bribed an employee who created the appearance that he had AIDS. Now his symptoms and medical records indicated the presence of the disease and its acute course. Death. He pretended to be bedridden and sick for 8 months. Stephen's ultimate goal was to convince them that he was on the brink of death so that he would be granted parole and transferred to an external medical facility. The next step, the most difficult and dangerous in the entire operation, was to induce a coma to convince everyone that the disease had reached a terminal stage, and he was dying. Stephen collected sedative drugs, which were given to him over several days, then took them all at once until he lost consciousness and fell into a coma for 4 days. Prison doctors were convinced that Stephen had only a few weeks to live. They agreed to his request for parole and sent him to the care center. But this time, Stephen decided to use cunning to rid himself of persecution once and for all. He decided to stage his own death. Stephen contacted prison authorities and employees of the care center, pretending to be a doctor named Adam Ruiz. He claimed to specialize in AIDS treatment and had experimental treatment for this disease. He wanted to know if there were any prisoners with AIDS who were suitable candidates for the experiment. Stephen turned out to be the perfect candidate for this experiment. He forged his own death certificate, signing it with the name of Dr. Adam Ruiz. Stephen sent copies of the fake certificate to the care center, the prison, and the officer responsible for parole. Thus, no one would look for him. Stephen successfully escaped from prison for the 4th time, and he did it completely and unprecedentedly. What happened next? What happened next? A few weeks later, he regained his strength and health, but he began to engage in machinations again. And again, he failed due to a foolish mistake. He went to a regular printing house, where he asked to print a fake attorney ID. The owner suspected something was amiss, but still helped him by providing the necessary card. Stephen took the card and left the printing house. The owner sensed something was wrong and decided to contact the officer in Houston, informing him of what had happened and sending a copy of the card he had made for Stephen. When the officer saw the photo, he immediately recognized the infamous prisoner who had escaped several times and then died. A few weeks after staging his death, Stephen went to a bank in Dallas, pretending to be a millionaire and trying to get a loan of $75,000. However, the bank's vice president suspected something was wrong and asked him to wait while he contacted the FBI and reported him. Sensing danger, Stephen realized something was wrong and decided to divert attention by simulating a stroke and calling an ambulance to avoid meeting with law enforcement. Final escape. Stephen was placed in a hospital room but was not allowed to leave until the FBI arrived. But the guy once again used his cunning and self-confidence. He called the hospital administration, pretending to be an FBI agent, and informed them that he was being released, claiming that the investigation was over and he was no longer a suspect. After a while, the hospital administration informed the FBI that they had received a call from the FBI instructing them to release Stephen. FBI agents were surprised, as you can imagine. The only thing left of Stephen's belongings was his driver's license with his photo, confirming that he was in Dallas. They tracked him down and arrested him for the 4th time. After the disgrace he caused to the Texas authorities, they decided to make an example of him and handed down incredibly harsh sentences. He received 144 years of imprisonment without the possibility of parole and was placed in the most secure unit, usually reserved for the most dangerous killers and criminals, despite Stephen's crimes not being violent. In this unit, prisoners spend 23 hours a day in solitary confinement with 1 hour for exercise and personal hygiene, all under strict supervision. Even today, Stephen remains in this highly secure unit, where he is serving his sentence from 1998. A truly insane story, isn't it? It's amazing how such a brilliant man made such foolish mistakes. Or was it all part of his game? In any case, that's all for now, but if Stephen escapes again, I'll definitely make a sequel. Thanks for watching.